Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Sasuke's eyebrows drew together at the kunoichi standing a few feet in front of him. Her silly red rain jacket nearly reached her knees and Sasuke couldn't help but think she looked as if she were drowning in it despite the water that was running off it. Just having thrown his jacket at him, she was trying her best to look serious, one hand on her hip and the other still clutching the remains of the bento box. If only she knew how ridiculous she looked. It took everything in the Uchiha to check his temper. The previous night had been rough on him. Just as he feared, after all this time, the nightmares returned and Sasuke struggled to find peace in the darkness. With the dawn, came the rain and the Uchiha had retired to the training zone nearest his campout, fighting the invisible targets in his mind to ease the tension in his body that accompanied the memories. Just as he was about to send his Chidori through a tree, he sensed her. Why he had immediately turned and headed in her direction, the Uchiha didn't know and was now regretting approaching her. Now, as he sat with his jacket in his hands, he swallowed his retorts. After a few seconds, he rose to his feet and crossed his arms, replying to her order, "I'm not going anywhere." "Then neither am I," Sakura said, walking over to him, situating herself in the exact spot where he had just been sitting. Sasuke raised his hand to massage his temples and under his breath, he said, "I see you're just as annoying as you've always been." "You haven't changed much either," she replied, glancing up to make eye contact with him. After a few seconds of shared glaring, Sakura's stern expression faded and she offered him a faint smile, to which Sasuke couldn't help but breathe out his frustration at the sight. Infuriating woman. The thunder that shook the ground had the both of them wearing shocked expressions as a tree a few meters away from them lit up as it came into contact with the lightning that streaked down from the sky. Without another second's hesitation, Sasuke reached his hand out and grabbed Sakura's arm, pulling her quickly away from the tree, just in case. He led her a safe distance away before releasing her arm and slipping back on his soaked cloak. "Okay," he said, "I'll go." This was not a good idea, Uchiha thought as he stared at Sakura's apartment door. She was fumbling with the lock in the rain and Sasuke frowned as the rain went from heavy to excessive in the span of 2 seconds. He was making a huge mistake. It would be one thing for Sasuke to accept someone's hospitality, but it was something entirely different to accept Sakura's, the one person he was doing his best to avoid at all costs. What was he going to do now? This was the last thing that Sakura needed, for him to show up back in her life. He was doing her harm just by interacting with her. A large click resounded and Sakura pushed firmly on the door. "Come in," she said pleasantly, and Sasuke took one last second of indecision before sighing and stepping over the threshold. Sakura flicked the lights on and hung her rain jacket on the rack next to her door. He jumped when her hands lightly touched his shoulders and he made to jerk away from her before realizing that she was just trying to lighten him from the load of his drenched cloak. He rolled his shoulders back, allowing it to roll off into her hands. "Well, it's not much, but make yourself at home," she said after hanging his jacket next to hers. She gestured to the apartment around her and Sasuke couldn't help but take it all in, committing the layout to memory. He didn't know exactly what to expect, other than that it would be small, but the room before him was simple, clean, and surprisingly comforting. There was a large sofa, a yellow sitting chair in the corner, and a small bookshelf on the adjacent wall. He couldn't help but realize how warm it felt compared to the cool weather outside, and the smell of cooked rice instantly made his stomach growl. He coughed in an attempt to disguise the sound. Sakura smiled at him, leading him down the hallway to the bathroom. "The shower is in here," she said, opening the door. "Once you are dry, then I'll fix you something to eat." Sakura then retreated to the far room at the end of the corridor and Sasuke couldn't help but stand awkwardly in the hall as he heard her shuffling noisily in the bedroom. She returned a few minutes later, offering him a pair of large baggy pants and a blank white t-shirt, which Sasuke also noted to be his size. Whose? He began, then firmly clamped his mouth before he could finish the sentence, instantly regretting what he was about to ask. He blushed furiously and turned to look away from her. Oh, she said, rubbing the back of her neck awkwardly, obviously catching on to his train of thought. Those were my father's clothes before I claimed them. They're big, but that's all I have, and they should work until I can clean yours. Is that okay? Yes, he said quickly, hiding his face from her. He entered the bathroom and closed the door, letting out a heavy, exasperated sigh. He glanced down at the clothes in his hands and couldn't help but feel a little relieved despite his embarrassment. He leaned his head back against the door. What the hell was he doing? Sakura pulled fresh rice from the cooker for the second time today, arranging it once again into nori-wrapped balls of rice, adding fresh tomatoes on top. She fumbled gracelessly with the plate, almost spilling it onto the floor when she heard the bathroom door open. Steadying herself, she breathed deeply to calm down as she walked over to the dining table, setting down the plate and pretending like nothing had just happened. Sasuke walked into the room, appropriately post-shower disheveled, wet hair dangling in his eyes. Sakura couldn't help but appraise how her father's clothes hung loosely on his body. She snapped her gaze away when she noticed him raising an eyebrow at her directed stare. Here, she gestured quickly to the plate at the table. I hope you don't mind vegetable gunkan maki. I added tomatoes for you. It looks more appetizing when it's not on the ground, he said bluntly, coming to stand beside the table. It took Sakura a second to realize he was teasing. Yes. Well, you'll be glad to know I'm not usually so clumsy, she said, then froze when a smirk became present on his face. Are you sure about that? He remarked, sitting down across from the food. Sakura's face turned scarlet at the realization that he must have seen her flailing just a few minutes ago. She took a seat opposite him, helping herself to her own portion of the gunkan maki. This wasn't her first time making it, but she found herself questioning whether or not that it was good and if Sasuke would actually like it. He ate quickly and Sakura realized that it might have been a while since he had last eaten anything home-cooked. With this thought, she began to ask him about all the food he ate on his journey, what he did for shelter, and if he was treated kindly. He had short positive answers to the first two questions, both to what Sakura had expected. The medical side of her questioned whether he was getting the nutrition he needed along with the rest his body demanded after using the Rinnegan. He didn't answer the third question and Sakura pretended not to notice. He finished his first serving so Sakura jumped up to get him more. Halfway through his second serving, she noticed him purposefully slowing down. There's more where that came from, she said with a small giggle. I want you to eat as much as you can before you. He looked up at her and Sakura held her breath. She could have tried to backtrack or make an excuse for what she was about to say, but they both knew what she meant. When will you be leaving? She asked boldly after a few minutes, a sad smile marking her features as she averted her eyes from him. She might as well ask, since he wasn't denying it. Looking back down at his food, he answered, soon. And there it was. The answer she knew she didn't want to hear. It hit her like a fist to the gut and heavy silence hung over the both of them. Soon. As if wanting to leave absolutely no doubt, Sasuke added, once Naruto comes back to the village, I will return to my mission. But, she began, then cut herself short, redirecting her gaze away from him. There was no point trying to convince him otherwise. She had already tried this once before and Sakura was aware of what Sasuke had to do for their village. She had once helped Naruto, Sasuke, Kakashi, and Obito defeat Kagaya. But now, Sasuke continued to search for traces of Kagaya and investigate her race of people that the shinobi world still believed to be out there. It was hard for her not to think selfishly in this matter. What would she do if Sasuke might never be home for good? She couldn't bear the thought of eternal loneliness without him. And what would she do if he decided he wanted nothing to do with her, when he was home? Standing, she grabbed the now empty plates from the table and returned to the kitchen as Sasuke observed her silently. He followed her lead and began to help her, taking the plates from her hands and proceeding to wash them in the sink. Sakura panicked at his nearness and in order to keep herself busy, began to boil water for hot, herbal tea. She couldn't look at him and didn't want to face him, so kept her body strategically placed so that he was at her back. Sasuke, I understand why you must leave. I understand why you believe that you have to be the one to carry this weight. But please, when you're home, don't treat me like a stranger. Despite how hard she tried to resist them, small tears pricked the corners of her eyes as she said this. She couldn't help but think about the past week of knowing he was here but not being able to see him. It was unfair and absolute torture. She wiped furiously at her eyes before Sasuke could see them. All she could ever do was cry. Sakura heard Sasuke turn the faucet off and lean against the counter behind her. Then also understand that it is not my intention to hurt you. She could acutely feel his presence from behind her and after a few minutes of gathering her courage, she turned to face him. If you think that deliberately going out of your way to avoid me, isn't hurting. He took a step towards her and looked down at her, suddenly interrupting her, is this what you want? Is this how you want to live? Sasuke, she began, placing a palm on her forehead. However long it takes, I will. Why? Sasuke turned away from her with an impatient sigh. He walked out of the kitchen and looked out the dining room window, watching the lightning streak across the sky. He placed his hands on the window sill and leaned forward. What is it with you people? He breathed out angrily. You and Naruto. Why can't you just move on with your lives and forget me? Sakura gawked at him, frustrated with his hurtful words. Because we can't, you idiot. You don't think that would be easier for me? For all of us. But guess what, Sasuke, it's not going to happen. A solid 10 minutes of tense thunder-filled speechlessness surrounded them before either of them made another sound. The sudden screeching of the kettle shocked Sakura into movement and she removed the pot from the heat. I'm sorry, Sakura said, pouring the hot water into 2 cups. I didn't bring you here to yell at you. She suddenly felt very guilty. This was not how she pictured an evening with him. Don't apologize, he said, still facing the window. I'll never be able to give you what you want. After she finished infusing the tea leaves, she placed the cups on the table and continued to stare at his back. He turned to face her and the two of them both looked down at their feet. How do you know what I want, Sasuke Uchiha? She saw him silently glance up at her in the corner of her vision. He pulled his hands from his pockets, sat down at the table again, and reached out for one of the cups on its surface. Sasuke stared hard into the tea, not wanting to answer her question. Of course, he knew what she wanted. Sakura, his childhood friend who grew up alongside him as a genin, wanted him to be with her. Selfishly, Sasuke had wanted nothing more than to find happiness, too, at one point in his life. That's why he had created the bonds that he had. He had wanted to be with his friends and eventually take root in Konohagakure. However, this was a dream Sasuke had abandoned a long time ago. His purpose had changed. He had become a ninja that the shinobi world now relied on. For the sake of those around him, for those whose happiness he had to protect but could not share in, Sasuke had given up that dream. There was something bigger now that was more important than what either of them wanted. Instead of replying, he took a full drink of the steaming tea in his hand, warm relief traveling throughout his rigid body. He suddenly realized that this was a medicinal tea as his tense muscles instantly became relaxed. He couldn't help but be surprised at the tea's effects. Well, Sakura stated, sitting at the table with him again. For starters, I want you to stop dodging me when you're in the village. Can you at least do that? She tried to smile, diminishing some of the tension between them. Stubborn, as always. She didn't know what she was asking. By requesting this, she was only prolonging her own heartache. I'll agree, he stated. But only if you comply with something that I want. She stopped mid-sip, lowering her cup and arching an eyebrow. The expression on her face wasn't one of curiosity or wonder. Her eyes only professed worry. What's that? She asked finally. More intently than he had ever before, he firmly held her green eyes with his, wanting the full weight of his words to hit home with her. I want you to stop waiting for me, Sakura. Sakura looked at him blankly, then returned her attention to her tea. She took a long drink, swallowing the liquid heavily and sighed. Sasuke waited. He was hoping that she would agree to his terms. He couldn't give her the happiness she wanted, or deserved for that matter. How much easier her life would be if she tried to move on. If she found happiness with someone else, Sasuke wouldn't have to feel guilty anymore. After a minute, Sakura met his eyes with just as much boldness as he had looked at her a second ago. I'm sorry, Sasuke. I would rather you ignore me than admit that I would give up on you. For as long as you care for me, I will wait. Irritation like a developing fire burned throughout his body, and in order to calm himself, Sasuke took a long drink of the medicinal tea before saying, What makes you think I care for you? I tried to kill you. And have done much more since then. That statement didn't have the desired effect like he had hoped. She only continued to stare at him squarely and asked, Did I not try to kill you first? You didn't go through with it, he dismissed her. I was prepared to kill you. I wouldn't have pulled back, Sakura. If it weren't for Kakashi and Naruto, he looked away, too ashamed to look at her. That day burned a hole in his memory and he hated to recall it. It was one of the days that Sasuke regretted most and appeared often in his nightmares. Not only did he fully intend to kill Karen that day, but Sakura, Naruto, and Kakashi, too. He had wanted them all dead. It didn't matter to him that he had once had bonds with them. At that time, all Sasuke could see was his goal of destroying the Leaf Village and everyone in it. Sakura had arrived right before he was about to send a Chidori through the red-haired Kunoichi from Team Taka, whom he had sacrificed in order to kill Danzo. Although it was a ploy to kill him, Sakura had arrived on the scene, begging to join him in his quest for revenge. He had demanded for her to kill Karen in order to gain his trust, but he ended up aiming a Chidori at Sakura's back instead. Fortunately, Kakashi had followed her and stopped him before he could deliver the blow. After battling with his former sensei, his vision suddenly had failed and Sakura had used the opportunity to strike him. She had paused, unable to commit herself to go through with killing him. At the time, he had considered her weak, and in his hatred, had grabbed her by the neck, stealing her kunai and aiming it at her. If Naruto hadn't jumped in, she would be dead. He undoubtedly would have killed her. If neither of them had interfered, Sasuke wouldn't be sitting here, talking to her, eating the food and drinking the tea that Sakura had made him. He placed his forehead in his palm at the thought. What would he be doing now, if she had been killed by his hand? A small weight rested on his shoulder, and with her comforting hand, came her reply. You've already apologized for your past. There's no need to bring it up, now. You're not that person anymore. You're the Sasuke I remember. Lifting his head, he widened his eyes and pulled away from her touch, snapping, and you're naive. What reason have I given you to make you believe that? What makes you so sure to dismiss everything I've done despite my pathetic apology to you? She pulled her arm back towards her own body, saying, for starters, you saved Chino and her followers from the path of revenge. But that's not all. You're doing so much for the village just by investigating Kagaya. He remained silent, staring down at his fisted hand around the cup, forcing it to relax. How could she possibly use those actions to justify everything? Why couldn't she just hate him? That's what he deserved. Despite taking a journey to atone for his sins, Sasuke still felt undeserving of the love that his friends had for him. Even though he had changed drastically, becoming more like his former self, Sasuke kept seeing his sins as unforgivable. Interrupting his thoughts, Sakura suddenly added, "You also came for me." "What?" he asked, completely unaware what she was talking about. "Try to deny it all you want, but I saw you that day. The day that Kido kidnapped me. You came to save me." Sasuke found himself suddenly remembering another day. He had been receiving rumors that he had been recently sighted dealing with missing Nin in order to devise a plot against the Konohagakure, but didn't think twice about it. He hadn't done such a thing and he would leave it to the Leaf to handle things on their own. He was just a few steps away from getting closer to the time-space dimension where Kagaya had once resided, that he'd be damned if something came up now to distract him. Just before he was about to use the Rinnegan, he saw an unfamiliar hawk flying towards him in the distance. As he had reached up with his arm, the bird landed firmly and Sasuke retrieved and read the note it was carrying. Someone named Kido claimed to be holding Sakura as a hostage, threatening to kill her if he didn't make an appearance in the village. Sasuke had clutched the note and his hands had gone white. He had cursed, spun on his heel, and had never taken flight as swiftly as he did in that moment. Arriving on the scene that day, Sasuke encountered several Anbu who were fleeing from the village, headed in his direction. Sasuke had noticed tailed beast chakra surrounding them and instantly used his fire release to encircle them in a ring of fire. Coming through the flames, Sharingan activated, the Uchiha had placed them all under a genjutsu. By using the Sharingan, Sasuke was able to acquire the information he wanted. They had all been Kido's subordinates and he watched their memories play out, learning of Kido's plan to use Sasuke for his Sharingan drug, the tailed beast chakra capsules, and Sakura's capture. He had grabbed one of the men by the collar, roughly pulling him in closer as he watched the man's memories of Sakura play in his mind. Sasuke saw what they had said to her, how they had caught her, and watched as a copy of himself walked up to her and mocked her on Kido's orders. It was hard to finish watching the memories play out after that, but he allowed it to continue, soon finding relief in them as he watched Sakura escape and take Kido on herself. He relived this particular man's panic as Kido's subordinates got the alarm that Kido's chakra had suddenly diminished, which indicated his defeat, cueing their flight from the village. After this, Sasuke had released the man, catching a feel of his former teammates, chakra coming towards him, including Sakura's. She had been alive and Sasuke couldn't help but feel foolish for not having enough faith in her abilities. He had shown up to save her, only to find that he had not been needed after all. He had been relieved but annoyed at the same time, having left Kagaya's trail. Knowing that Sakura was well and safe, he didn't waste a second, bounding off into the woods once again in search of what he had left behind. Leaning his head back, Sasuke drank the last of the tea, resigning himself to the last of its calming effects. After a minute, he said, "You saved yourself. I did nothing for you." She was smiling again, and Sasuke wondered if it was because she knew he couldn't back his way out of this one. Finally, she said, "Even though you were a little late, you still came. This is how I know you care." His eyes widened slightly and he turned to look at her. Was that why he had gone after her? Yes, he had been worried for her and Sasuke couldn't help but admit to himself that the bonds he had once had with his friends, he was trying to restore on some level. Yes, Sasuke supposed he could say with honesty that he cared for them now, like he had used to before being consumed in darkness. He couldn't exactly say he would be in this very room, if he didn't. But if he confirmed that now, admitting this to Sakura, he knew she would never stop waiting for him. He couldn't have that, so instead, he said absolutely nothing. "There's one other thing that has given me hope," she said with a smile, leaning towards him. Before he could even ask, he felt a small tap on his forehead and a small breath escaped him as her fingers pulled away from his forehead. She stood there, grabbing the empty cups from the table, laughing at Sasuke's expression of shock. She walked away from him, leaving Sasuke to rub his forehead and revisit the hundreds of memories that came with the familiar gesture. A scene came to his mind. Leaving the village had been easy, but saying goodbye to his friends had been a little more difficult. Sakura had once again expressed her desire to go with him on his journey, looking embarrassed and afraid of rejection. Sasuke had told her that she had nothing to do with his sins, and of course she had been disheartened. At that moment, he walked up to her and poked her forehead, reassuring her that he would be back soon. Ah, he thought. He supposed he was making a habit of using that gesture with her. Well, he would have to be less transparent with her in the future. He sighed, hoping that wouldn't be too hopeless. Sasuke roused to the sound of loud banging and without realizing exactly where he was, he threw the mass that was on top of him away from him and reached out in the dark for his katana. Grabbing firmly onto the sword's hilt, he aimed it towards the direction of the noise. After a hazy second of confusion, Sasuke realized he was in Sakura's living room, having just jumped off the couch and practically destroyed the blankets and pillows that were now sprawled across the room. As the day's previous memories returned to him, he snapped his head towards the source of the jarring noise and realized it was coming from the door. Sakura-san! Sakura-san! Are you in there? Someone yelled from outside, pounding as if they could break the door down. Sasuke moved angrily towards the door in his stupor, wondering why someone would be creating such an uproar in the middle of the night like this. Just as he was about to throw open the door and aim his sword in their direction, Sakura came bursting out from the bedroom down the hall. What is it? What's going on? She demanded as she ran towards him, wrapping a cloak firmly around herself to conceal her nightclothes. Sasuke was instantly released from his leftover sleep when he saw this, looking immediately away from her. The noise came again, along with the frantic shouting, Sakura-san! Hello! Damn it! Sasuke was right behind her whenever Sakura's hand finally made connection with the door's handle and he watched as she threw open the door to reveal a young ninja dressed in the standard medic colors of cream and red. Oh, thank goodness, the man exclaimed at the sight of her, panting heavily. Fumio! Sakura gasped. What in the world is going on? The man fainted in his frantic breathing for a second when he suddenly noticed Sasuke's glare over Sakura's shoulder. Reflecting on it later, Sasuke supposed he did look rather severe with his weapon drawn and his face expressing his extreme desire to punch this man in the face. The ninja redirected his attention back to Sakura and remembering his panic, managed to stumble out, "There's been an emergency. We need you, immediately. Go," Sakura demanded, speaking in an authoritative voice that Sasuke didn't recognize. "I'll be right behind you. You can update me on the way." She didn't even take a second to close the door before she was running back down the corridor towards her bedroom, nearly giving Sasuke whiplash as he tried to follow her movements. "Sasuke," he heard her call from the bedroom, "I don't have time to be formal with you, right now, so I'll just say it." Sasuke made to move down the hall towards her voice but stopped when she retreated from the bedroom, now clad in her medical garb. She took his arm and pushed something cold into his palm. He raised his hand and unwrapped his fingers, finding himself looking down at a small silver key. "I want you to stay here while you are in Konoha," she said resolutely. Sasuke's eyes widened and he instantly thrusted the key back at her, but she had already walked past him and was now proceeding to slip on her shoes by the door. "No," Sasuke began seriously, about to tell her that he didn't want to stay here. He had just stayed the night because of the storm and that was all. He didn't manage to speak a word of this before Sakura interrupted him. "Look," she said, slipping on her lab coat that had been hanging next to her red rain jacket. "This is an offer with no strings attached. I understand you are leaving and you don't plan to stay. But for as long as you are in the village, let me help you as a friend." She turned to face him then, using 1 second of her time to level him with her determined demeanor. Before Sasuke could register what she had said, the door slammed as Sakura made her hurried exit. Looking down at his palm again, he sighed and fisted the key. Damn it. Sakura found herself staring at a scene she wasn't quite ready for. She had surpassed Fumio in their flight after he told her the details of the situation. One of Sakura's newly admitted mental health patients, a young child named Amiko, whose parents had been recent victims of Chino's chakra human bombs, had just jumped off the top floor of the hospital wing. When Sakura finally made it to the south side of the hospital, she immediately spotted a group of medical ninjas huddled in the street before her, surrounding the child's body. At Sakura's sudden appearance, a tear-streaked Ino called out to her from the crowd. Sakura! She cried frantically as Sakura approached them. In Sakura's panic, she rushed forward and the group parted for her, revealing the gruesome reality before her. The small child lay sprawled on her back, a pale figure in the dark. Amiko's arm was twisted horrendously at her side, having taken the brunt of the child's fall. Shizune was kneeling beside the girl, fingers covered in blood as she held the child's head in her lap. Never had Sakura witnessed something so horrifying as this. A child, younger than most in her clinic, who had felt that life was not worth living and so flung herself from the top story of the medical wing. Sakura knelt next to the child and Shizune backed away. She's gone, Shizune whispered, looking away from Sakura's eyes. I'm so sorry. Looking down into Amiko's face, Sakura saw that the child stared blankly up at the sky. There was nothing in them. Blood pooled beneath Amiko's head and Sakura placed her hands on either side of the child's sticky wet temples. Instantly, green chakra pulsed from her palms into Amiko's head. Ever since Fumio had relayed the details to Sakura, she had already been planning the steps she would take to heal the girl, but Sakura gasped as she realized the true state of the child's brain and tears instantly sprung forward to her eyes. What was she doing in the medical wing? Kunoichi finally burst out, lashing out at her staff. She was supposed to have been in her room. No one could look her in the eyes as she searched desperately for answers. Sensei, Kirai, her medical pupil, said, "It's my fault. I called the majority of the staff away from the mental health section to help assist with the hospital patients. It was in the middle of the night and I didn't think without you, we've been." Sakura looked away from her, tears pouring freely down her cheeks. Memories of the child plagued her conscience. With no family and no other relatives, Sakura had admitted Amiko fully into the mental health clinic. Due to the child's extreme condition, Sakura recommended her for 24-hour care. She was only 6 and Sakura believed that she would have a promising recovery with the help from the clinic. Unfortunately, due to the increase of patients and lack of staff, Sakura had been unable to be with her. Damn it. Kirai was right. If only she had been here. If only she had been able to manage her patients better. If only she would have gone with her gut and came in yesterday, despite Kakashi's wishes. If only she hadn't been so distracted with Sasuke and her feelings for him. None of this would have happened. It was all her fault. She concentrated her chakra more fiercely into the child's skull, willing the damage to be undone. Sakura's former strength still hadn't quite fully returned, and after a few minutes, her breath grew ragged and sweat began to bead on her forehead. To her expectations, the brain wasn't responding, and as Sakura tried to hope, she knew it was too late. The damage was irreversible, even for her medical ninjutsu. The child had just been too small, and the fall too great. Sakura was merely trying to revive what was already dead. Sakura's thoughts jumped to the woman who had used the one's own life reincarnation jutsu to revive Gaara, who had died by the hands of the Akatsuki. They had taken the tailed beast that had resided inside of him. The cost was Gaara's life. Chio had been able to bring him back with this jutsu. Sakura wished desperately to be in mastery of that jutsu. If she were, would she be able to save this child? Could she be so selfless? Sakura wanted the answer to be yes. Ino came up beside her, kneeling. Sakura, there's nothing you can do. I'm sorry, Sakura whispered as she lifted the child to her, holding and rocking the little girl in her arms, whispering her name. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. You'll get to see Mama and Papa soon. After a while, all Sakura could feel was numbness. She couldn't feel Ino prying her fingers off Amiko's clothing or her arms being untangled from the little girl's body. Sakura watched as Amiko's lifeless body was carried into the hospital. The circle of people was a blur around her and the kunoichi didn't move when one of them reached out to grab her. Sakura could barely register the voices around her. We need to get her inside. She might be going into psychogenic shock. She's our top medical ninja. Something like this wouldn't affect her that much, she's seen far worse. Her chakra reserves are low, you idiot. Despite the voices, Sakura sat on the ground, willing herself to move. To get up and face the situation like the strong kunoichi she knew that she could be. She was responsible for this, after all. It's her fault. It's her fault. It's her fault. But before she could rise, her arms were wrapped over the necks of two ninja and she let them help her inside. Let's get this over with, Sasuke Uchiha thought as he approached the village gates at sunrise. Kakashi wasn't there, of course. He had specifically told him to meet him at the entrance, bright and early, today. Liar. He muttered under his breath, leaning against the gates, a symbol in annoyance. He had blatantly ignored the gatekeepers who seemed very tired after their long shift. Their interest had spiked when they saw the Uchiha, but after passing them in silence, the ninja resumed their laid-back positions. Sasuke could empathize with their exhaustion. With last night's events, Sasuke had found it difficult to find sleep again. After Sakura had left, he had immediately placed the key she had given him on the table. Like hell he would stay in her apartment for the remainder of his visit. What did she expect? For him to accept and they awkwardly bump into each other for a few more nights, struggling to make conversation, and ignore the fact that he was leaving. Tossing throughout the remainder of the night, he had kept sneaking glances at the silver object on the table. In the morning, just before he left, he had grabbed the key from the table, unsure of what to do with it. What if was the only key? He couldn't just leave it on the table. He had thought about leaving it under the mat on the porch but there wasn't one. Now, as he pulled it from his pocket, the Uchiha couldn't help but stare at it in frustration, as if it were an unwelcome burden. Why did Sakura want to do this to herself? She knew the truth, so why did she insist that he stay? He couldn't do that to her. Besides, what would that mean for them? If he crossed that boundary, how would she ever move on? He rubbed the key's surface absently, then hurriedly stashed it in his cloak's interior pocket when he sensed a familiar presence land beside him. Sorry I'm late, Kakashi greeted. I'm afraid that I got. Save it, the Uchiha interrupted him, his lip almost tilting at the corner. Sasuke had almost forgotten what it was like to wait around on this man. Even though it annoyed him to no end, a warm nostalgia came with his former sensei's excuses. Kakashi sighed, just as impatient as you've always been. Sasuke noticed the smile that this man was failing to conceal behind his black mask. Sasuke supposed Kakashi was remembering a better time, too. After a minute of silence, Kakashi finally said, our guests should be here anytime. I'm afraid our friend Yamato won't be joining us. However, I believe you'll recognize their escort who agreed to meet up with him. Sasuke looked over at the white-haired ninja beside him, unamused with this guessing game. The only ninja he had any desire to see pass through this gate was that annoying, spiky-haired, idiot. Maybe if he would hurry, then Sasuke wouldn't have to face this awkward situation he was currently finding himself in. Naruto was sure to take his time. With the sunrise, a light pink-yellow hue began to illuminate the trees, outlining a group of people as they made their way to the entrance. Sasuke sighed. Well, here we go. As they got closer, Sasuke heard a loud voice at the head of the crowd. Forward. We are almost there. The village gates are just yards away. This loud figure soon came into view, and Sasuke resisted the urge to sigh again when he recognized the thick-eyebrowed, tights-wearing ninja who happened to be jogging in place. Not only was Rock Lee doing squats every few feet, but he had several children wrapped around his arms and legs who were giggling and grinning as they bounced around with his movements. One child had 2 fists full of Lee's hair as he rode atop Lee's shoulders, and Sasuke could faintly hear the child repeating Lee's orders. "Forward, people," the child yelled, "to the gates." After him came the rest of the group. In sharp contrast to Lee's energy, the crowd that followed him practically sagged in exhaustion. Sasuke couldn't help but smirk when he noticed the angry glares the ninja were giving Lee. Knowing Lee, he had probably turned the trip into a form of youth-building expedition. Some of the angry countenances disappeared completely when the people noticed the gates. Lee seemed to spot the 2 of them waiting. "Ah, Lord Hokage. As you can see, the mission has been successful, sir," he shouted, forming a salute with his childbearing right arm. The dangling youngster giggled as the ninja snapped his hand to his forehead. The other child on his shoulders copied Lee's salute. "Sasuke." Lee raised his thick eyebrows, lowering his hand again. "Is that really you? You were the last person I was expecting to see today." As Sasuke raised his hand in a half-interested attempt at acknowledgement, he picked up the low murmur in the crowd. He couldn't help but pick out his name among the talk. Some of the children detached themselves from Lee and ran up to the Uchiha, yanking on his cloak and saying, "Sasuke. Sasuke." Suddenly, he realized that the faces in the crowd wore smiles. Almost everyone either waved or yelled out his name. Kakashi suddenly elbowed him, grumbling, "You're outshining the Hokage. Get used to it," the Uchiha retorted, detaching a child from his leg and holding her away from him at a safe distance as she giggled manically. "Sorry about that," a young woman said as she came up to him, removing the child from his hands. "The children have all heard the stories about how you saved us from the arena." A burly ninja, a man Sasuke barely recognized from his fight with him in the arena, suddenly clapped him on the back, saying, "Yes, the great Sasuke Uchiha and his Sharingan. They've been dying to meet you. We are very grateful," another ninja said to him as they all began to circle him, offering their thanks and bows. Sasuke found this sudden attention both shocking and undeserved. Feeling a little suffocated, the Uchiha looked over at Kakashi, who was smiling like a dumb idiot at him, crossing his arms as he laughed. Lee was also grinning at him. Neither of them were trying to help him out. One by one, the crowd broke away as their sights landed on the Hokage. Parents began to chastise their rambunctious children, telling them to act presentable in the presence of the Hokage. Sasuke couldn't help but smile as one father grabbed his child by the shirt as he swung fists back at him, whispering, "Straighten up. We don't want the Hokage to know you're a little demon." Kakashi laughed at this and offered the crowd a welcoming smile. "Welcome to Konohagakure, everyone. I'm sure Lee has told you all about us in the village. And by the sudden frowns I see, I assume he has also run some of you into the groan." Lee looked proud despite everyone's glares of judgment towards him. Kakashi rubbed the back of his neck again, awkwardly. "Sorry about that." Looking closely at the ninja, Sasuke could see fatigue etched in the lines of their faces. It seemed that they hadn't quite caught a break since their release from their previous owners. Some of them still carried injuries in the form of sprained arms, bruises, and burns from their fight with Sasuke, to which he felt guilt knot up in his stomach. He wished now that there had been a better way to secure their freedom. It seemed Kakashi realized this himself, for he spoke up, "Well, I suppose a village tour will have to wait. Let's get you guys some rest. For those of you who have injuries, I want you to come with me to Konoha's hospital. Lee, I want you to escort the rest to their lodgings, and please go easy on them." "Yes, sir." Lee saluted once again, turning to march in the direction of their quarters. Sasuke watched the little boy from earlier clamber back onto Lee's shoulders and begin to yell, "Forward." After the group split, Mostly men remained. Sasuke found it difficult to look them in the face even though they all looked at the Uchiha with admiration. Right then, Kakashi said, turning and walking through the gates. Swinging his cloak, Sasuke walked hurriedly to catch up to his former sensei in order to avoid conversation with these ninja. Sasuke was trying to come up with an excuse to split. He didn't quite care to go to the hospital and face Sakura after their conversation last night. Also, he didn't particularly want to see the look on her face when she found out that Sasuke had caused all of these injuries. For some reason, he didn't want her to know it was him. Look, Kakashi, I better, Sasuke began, but was cut short when a ninja landed in front of them. Sasuke recognized the spiky pony-tailed ninja and frowned when Shikamaru rushed up to Kakashi's other side, speaking to the Hokage in a low voice. Sasuke was about to take advantage of the situation and just leave altogether, but found himself rooted to the spot when he heard Sakura's name in Shikamaru's hushed speech. Without realizing what he was doing, Sasuke strained to hear the conversation. Why haven't I been told about this sooner? Kakashi asked him in annoyance. I couldn't find you. This was the last place I looked. I only just learned about it myself, Shikamaru exclaimed. Where is she? Is she okay? Kakashi asked, slowing his pace. Ino says she's keeping an eye on her, Shikamaru replied. Kakashi reached up and grabbed the bridge of his nose and closed his eyes. Damn it. Sasuke's frown deepened when Kakashi suddenly turned to the group that followed him, presenting them with a sudden excuse. My apologies. It seems we won't be going to the hospital, after all. If you guys don't mind, Sasuke will escort you to the lodgings along with the rest of your group. I'll personally accompany a medical ninja to see to your injuries in your rooms. In sharp contrast to Sasuke's current feelings, the group seemed relieved to be going straight to their shelter. What the hell, Kakashi? Sasuke hissed at the Hokage. What is going on? Sorry Sasuke, his sensei replied. I need to see someone right now. Sasuke wanted nothing more than to grab him by the cloak and demand answers. What the hell were he and Shikamaru talking about? Did it have to do with Sakura's sudden leave last night? Did something bad happen to her? Before he could get these answers, Kakashi and Shikamaru were gone and Sasuke was left with a group who stared at him expectantly. Sasuke paced the ground outside of Sakura's apartment. It was almost midnight and she still hadn't come home. After Kakashi had left him with the crowd of newly admitted Konoha citizens, Sasuke had escorted them to their lodgings, left them in Lee's care, and vanished within minutes. He hadn't had any desire to hang around. After he left, Sasuke had stopped by Kakashi's office only to find it void of both his former sensei and the Shadow Master Ninja. Sasuke didn't know why he had gone straight there knowing that Kakashi and Shikamaru would most likely be gone. If Sakura was involved, Sasuke assumed the two of them had made a beeline for the hospital. To be honest, Sasuke had seriously considered heading in that direction, too, but had mentally chastised himself. Surely Kakashi could handle the situation being the Hokage, he supposed. The Hokage had chosen to keep him in the dark about it, after all. To occupy himself, Sasuke had spent the rest of his day looking for distracting things to do. He had trained for most of the evening, practicing taijutsu to avoid overusing his chakra. When his heart was no longer in the practice, Sasuke had turned to the methodical task of cleaning his weapons. Despite all this, Sasuke had kept worrying. It was dumb, to constantly find himself instinctively feeling like Sakura needed saving. He had seen her skills on the battlefield during the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, he had experienced her medical prowess firsthand, he had witnessed her victory against Kido. So why was he worrying? The Sasuke he had been just a couple of years ago certainly wouldn't have been. He wouldn't have even thought twice about it. Perhaps he really was changing. And so, to the Uchiha's embarrassment, he recently found himself lurking in front of Sakura's apartment under the cloak of darkness. He told himself he was just here to return the key. He would give her the key, tell her he refused her offer, then leave. But as the minutes ticked away, Sasuke's uneasiness grew. Where the hell was she? It was nearly 1 a.m. Surely she would have come back by now. Did something seriously bad happen to her? No, he told himself. He was choosing to have faith in her abilities. He supposed if it were serious enough, somebody would have made the effort to tell him. Or maybe not, Sasuke suddenly thought. He had been mostly absent for the past 6 years. It made sense that the Leaf Village would operate on emergencies without considering him. Maybe Sakura was just busy. Sasuke knew she was extremely preoccupied with her position as the hospital's head medic, especially now considering she had told him that a unit had departed for Kumogakure. Taking into account Naruto's persisting absence, Sasuke concluded that the medical crew must not have returned yet, either. Maybe, Sasuke suddenly thought, Sakura had already been here and decided to return to the hospital for the night shift. Completely annoyed with himself, Sasuke pulled the key from his pocket and swiftly unlocked the apartment's front door. He told himself he wasn't snooping as he slyly investigated the living room, bathroom, and kitchen, glancing around for any signs of her coming and going. There wasn't any point in sticking around if she had gone and left already. Suddenly, he heard the front door's handle unlatch and the Uchiha looked sharply towards the door. He crossed his arms, exhaling a sigh of relief and pretending not to feel annoyed as he leaned against the kitchen table. The Uchiha forced an expression of passivity on his face, quickly concealing his apprehension. He'd be damned if he gave her the satisfaction of seeing him even slightly worried. However, as the door swung open and Sasuke caught the faint outline of a stranger, he lunged forward. Shoving the intruder back outside into the ground, Sasuke unsheathed his katana and leveled it at the man's throat. "Whoa! Back off!" cried out a familiar voice, and as Sasuke's vision adjusted to the darkness, he was able to recognize the ninja laying on the ground before him. Deactivating his Sharingan, Sasuke sighed, "You. What the hell are you doing here?" Pushing the blade away from his face and rising to his feet, Shikamaru dusted off his shoulders. "Boy, this is a drag. I could ask you the same question, you know. Should we add stalking women to your list of crimes?" Sasuke narrowed his eyes at the ninja before him as he secured his blade back into its sheath. Sasuke didn't even know how to react. Part of him wanted to demand why Shikamaru felt like he had the liberty to just walk into Sakura's apartment. Who the hell did he think he was? The other part of Sasuke was somewhat disconcerted at the fact that someone other than Sakura had caught him here. He decided to ignore this part. Sasuke had every right to be here if he wanted. Unlike Shikamaru, he had a damn key, after all. "Not that I owe you any explanations," began the lazy ninja, "but I've been looking for you. In fact, looking here was the last on my list, considering I figured it would be the last place you'd be." Shikamaru paused to give that statement time to sink in before adding, "Guess I should have looked here first." "Spit it out," Sasuke sneered at him, "what do you want?" "Actually," he stated seriously, "it's about Sakura." Sasuke's angered expression disappeared as he heard this. "What happened? .. Sasuke couldn't help but feel a stab of concern as Shikamaru relayed to him the events that had happened the previous night. He told Sasuke that Sakura felt entirely to blame for the little girl's death due to her absence the previous 2 days. Shikamaru then told him that Sakura had chosen to throw herself into her work, but as the day continued, she began to break down. "Break down?" he had asked. "You'll see what I mean soon enough," Shikamaru said as the two of them had quickly made their way towards the hospital. What was that supposed to mean? Every time Sasuke had witnessed Sakura have a breakdown, it usually involved him. First, in the land of water when she thought he had died, he had regained consciousness only to have her kneeling over the top of him crying. The time that stuck out most in his mind was the night when he left the Leaf Village. She had been waiting on the road that led outside of the village when he had arrived, bag packed and not wearing his forehead protector. That night, all Sasuke had thought about was revenge. Even though she had cried out to him, confessed her feelings, and begged to go with him, he had still chosen to sever that bond. It was a bit ironic now, just how much he was willing to do to keep it, Sasuke thought as he walked through the hospital doors. Sasuke couldn't help but notice how different the hospital was, now that it had been rebuilt after Pain's attack on the village. Ino and Sai were the first two people the Uchiha noticed as he made his entrance. They were standing by one of the check-in desks. Sai had his back to him but turned when he saw Ino's expression change into one of shock. "Sasuke!" she exclaimed in disbelief, "what are you doing here?" Sasuke didn't respond as he turned to Shikamaru, who followed close behind him. "Well, where is she?" "This way," Shikamaru said before heading towards the stairs leading up to the second floor. Walking quickly, Sai and Ino caught up to them as they ascended the stairs. Sasuke didn't know if he was annoyed or somewhat relieved to find Shikamaru not in any particular rush to reach the top floor. Sakura wasn't in any immediate danger, then. Good, he thought to himself. But then Ino's voice interrupted his thinking. "Do you really think it would be good for Sasuke to see her like this, Shikamaru?" What the hell did that mean? Despite whatever objections we might have, Shikamaru replied, "It's Kakashi's orders." Sasuke narrowed his eyes at that slightly accusative statement. He supposed they had every right to think what they wanted about him. Sasuke knew he couldn't really win his old classmates over after everything he had done. To be honest, Sasuke didn't necessarily care if they didn't like him. It didn't matter, he told himself. Well, as a member of Team 7, Sai suddenly spoke up behind him, "I feel like my personal decisions should be considered." Sasuke couldn't help but turn and glare back in the ninja's direction, "And what decision is that?" Ino grabbed Sai's arm but the ninja pulled away, crossing his arms as he said, "That you get back to your mission outside the village." Sasuke ignored that comment and kept walking. He wasn't going to let that stupid ink-obsessed, poor choice of a replacement get to him. He would keep walking. "Sai," Ino nudged, "you know that Sasuke has important stuff that only he." "That's just part of his excuse," Sai continued, interrupting her. "If you want to know what I think it would be best for both Naruto and Sakura if you left and didn't come back." "No one asked what you thought," Sasuke said calmly, hiding the anger that was rising steadily in his throat. "Now get lost." "Unlike you," Sai began again, "I intend to protect my bonds with those two. That includes Sakura. I'm still not that great at understanding one's feelings, but even I can see that Sakura suffers greatly because of you. How is she supposed to find happiness if you keep reappearing and then ditching her again?" Sasuke fisted his palms as they turned a corner. Reacting will only give him what he wants, he thought. If only they all knew how often Sasuke had told himself these things. He knew what he was doing right now was contradicting everything he had done up until now. But hearing Sai say this, Sasuke had the sudden urge to prove this idiot wrong. Finally, they took another hurried left, revealing the Hokage dressed in the Hokage's white and red, leaning casually against one of the walls. He had his arms crossed, one foot against the wall as he looked up at the ceiling. As opposed to the rest of the hospital, this corridor's lights had been dimmed dramatically. At the sight of his sensei, Sasuke finally pushed past Shikamaru, leaving the others behind as he hurriedly approached the man who had requested him. "Kakashi, do you care to explain all this to me?" "It's about time," he said, straightening up. After realizing he wasn't going to receive a response to this, the Hokage asked, "What do you know, already?" "Not much," Sasuke answered flatly, still annoyed at the three ninja who were now eavesdropping a few feet away. Sasuke frowned at his sensei as the ninja placed his hands casually in his pockets, sighing. "Well," he began, "it seems our Sakura has finally found her way into Tsunade's stash of alcohol." Kakashi then emphasized his statement by pointing at the door directly across from the wall he had just been leaning against. Just to the right of the door, a small silver plaque that said, Haruno Sakura, labeled the door. Sasuke couldn't help but let out an annoyed sigh as he pinched his nose. Despite what Sakura had just gone through, he could help but think, this was what was wrong. She was drunk. He supposed he was somewhat relieved that there was nothing more wrong with her, but the more dominant feeling that the Uchiha was feeling was frustration. He had been unnecessarily worried about her all day, dealt with Shikamaru, Sai, and Ino all in one night, and now, Kakashi was telling him that she had gotten herself drunk. God, this woman would be the death of him. That's all. He spat out. You're the Hokage. Go in and get her. Why do you need me here? I've already tried, Kakashi said bluntly, looking shamefully away. We all have, Ino interjected from a few feet away. She doesn't want to see us. Sasuke just looked around at them like they were all a bunch of idiots. You call yourselves shinobi? He insulted them, walking towards Sakura's office door. As he grabbed the handle, twisted the knob, and pushed the door inward, Sasuke had to immediately slam it back shut to avoid being hit directly in the face with a thrown bottle. As the door clicked back shut, the glass shattered against the wood on the other side. I said stay the fuck out, Kakashi. Eyes now widened, Sasuke turned back to look at Kakashi. The Uchiha certainly wasn't expecting that. Kakashi just rubbed the back of his head embarrassingly, letting out a small laugh as he said, You're forgetting that she's a shinobi, too. And a terrible drunk. The two don't mix well. Sasuke remarked, thinking silently to himself, hand still resting on the doorknob. He supposed Sakura would be a rather violent drunk. She had always been the angry type with the people closest to her, especially to Naruto. Sasuke had always watched coolly as she exploded on him over the smallest things. There was more than just her temperament in effect here, though. After all, she was also dealing with a death. That was also more than likely intensifying her behavior. To be honest, he didn't know how he would handle this, other than to. Twisting the knob again, Sasuke ducked as he entered the dark room. As a number of bottles flew over the top of him, he was finally able to locate their source. Sakura was positioned in the corner of the room, sitting down behind a pile of empty bottles, many of which she was firing off at him like rounds. She wasn't even looking as she threw and cussed wildly. Dodging them, he was finally able to reach her. Grabbing hold of her left arm with his right hand, he tried to prevent her from throwing the next bottle. Sasuke found that keeping his grip on her was very difficult considering her inhuman strength, something he shouldn't have been surprised about. In order to keep from losing control, Sasuke ended up having to spin behind her, pinning her left arm and the bottle between them. When she turned to counter him, Sasuke had already activated his Sharingan. Their eyes briefly met and even in the dim light, Sasuke saw the surprise in hers right before he placed the kunoichi under his genjutsu. Sakura immediately slumped and Sasuke released his hold on her arm, guiding her shoulder to the wall. Once she was in an unconscious sitting position, he stood and began to look around. The furniture was knocked over and Sakura's desk was split down the middle. Liquor bottles and broken glass lay everywhere, but Sasuke was relieved to see that most of these were still full. She had definitely gotten herself drunk, but it could have been much worse. He heard crunching glass behind him as Kakashi entered the room, stopping a few feet away from him. He also heard Shikamaru and Sai grumbling to one another about him, throwing in occasional insults. Sasuke ignored this. You don't think you went a little far with the genjutsu? Kakashi asked, bending down to check on Sakura. You never did have much restraint. Sasuke scoffed at this. If Kakashi had wanted it handled a certain way, then he should have done it himself. He watched as his former sensei reached out to place a palm on Sakura's forehead. Her body temperature seems normal, Kakashi remarked, then held his ear close to her mouth. And her breathing is level for now. We should continue to watch for signs of alcohol poisoning throughout the night, but I think her primary need is rest at the moment. Sasuke felt his shoulders relax. He hadn't realized how rigid he was holding himself until that moment. Just as Kakashi made to reach out to her, Sasuke found himself butting in. "I'll take her," he said, not knowing why he had felt the sudden need to. Even as he looped her arm around his shoulder, carefully lifting her up from the ground, Sasuke tried to talk himself out of it, but couldn't. Kakashi stared blankly at him, as if he were truly shocked that Uchiha was offering to help her. A voice resounded from the doorway and Sasuke's glare fell on Shikamaru as the ninja said, "Like we'd really trust her with you." Sasuke really got their attention when he bent down and tipped Sakura over his right shoulder, holding her up by the back of the legs. There wasn't really a delicate way to hold someone with one arm. Still, Sasuke found that he would rather do it than anyone else. He walked towards the door but found that Sai wasn't giving way. Instead, the ninja held his ground and stuck out his jaw, speaking low, "If you think I'm just going to let you do what you move," the Uchiha demanded, activating the scarlet in his eyes. The Uchiha had just about endured all he could from this one. Suddenly, Kakashi was there, placing himself between the two. "All right, let's keep level heads, here," he spoke with that authoritative voice that reminded them all that he was the Hokage. Placing a firm hand on Sai's shoulder, Kakashi added, "Sai, that's enough. You are all forgetting that Sasuke is one of us. He is also a member of Team 7. We can trust him to take Sakura home." With that, there was no more arguing. Sasuke pushed through the group, leaving them all behind as he descended down the hall and down the stairs. Once he was out the door, taking a firmer hold on Sakura and making sure she was stable, he disappeared into the night. Sakura groaned as she rocked back and forth slightly. Her head pounded as she realized blood was rushing to her head from being upside down. Peeking in the darkness, it took her a hazy minute to realize that she was being carried and that she was watching the back of someone's feet as they walked. "Kakashi," she murmured. She tried to lift up slightly but a wave of nausea came over and she barely managed to keep from throwing up. She heard someone speak, a deep murmur that she couldn't distinguish. The world was a blur around her and she realized her body wasn't processing sound. Her vision, she realized, was also cloudy. Why was she being carried? What was going on? "Put me down," she managed to get out, a small alarm going off in her head that maybe it wasn't Kakashi helping her, but it was an enemy. Why else was she so dizzy? Had they poisoned her? Her ninja instincts told her she should try to get away, to kick, scream, to do anything to free herself. Lifting her right hand from the ninja's back, she pushed hard in an effort to lift up, but failed because of the nausea. Suddenly, the ninja who was holding her stopped and set her on the ground. As she was sitting, the ninja pushed back against her body until she was leaning against a solid surface. Sakura felt something cold touch her mouth and she instantly spat out as liquid hit her tongue. She wouldn't be drinking anything this ninja was giving her. Sakura heard the deep murmur again but couldn't recognize the words. In her dizziness, she was barely able to make out a dark figure crouching in front of her. Her instinct was to fight this person and run but her body wasn't moving. A hand came to her forehead and lingered there. Sakura squinted, trying to pull away. She was able to make out small orbs of light in the distance. It was comforting to know she was still in the village, but she was obviously in some sort of alley. This was not the place where she was supposed to be. Where was she supposed to be? Sakura heard the voice again and the hand on her forehead slid down to her chin. She felt pressure on it but when she didn't open her mouth, the hand pressed harder and Sakura found that she was too weak to resist. As her teeth opened, Sakura felt a small amount of water rush into her mouth and she swallowed some by accident. She tried to cough and when she did, vomit came up her throat and out her mouth. The ninja suddenly stood and took a step away from her. After she was finished, Sakura fell forward but before she could fall into her own mess, an arm caught hold of her body. Let go, she breathed. Her voice failed her. Sakura had meant to scream it. She heard the murmur again. It was slow with 3 beats to it. They were saying the same word over and over. It almost sounded like her name. Her vision grew black, and when the ninja picked her up again and placed her on his shoulder, she slipped back into unconsciousness. When she stirred again, she found herself laying on her side with something firm against her back. Reaching around her, she identified the feel of pillows and blankets. Was this her bed? She heard the same voice again and saw the figure of a person leaning against her bedroom doorframe. She wanted to speak out, but when she tried, a palm gently covered her eyes and she fell back asleep. Sasuke watched as the pink-haired Kunoichi tossed silently in her sleep. For a second, he thought he was going to have to force her to stay on her side, but she failed in her attempt to roll onto her back because of the wall of pillows he had fortified behind her, and so she returned to her side. Walking around to the foot of the bed, Sasuke quickly found another pillow that had been lost between the bed and the wall and tucked it against her chest. He also pushed her legs up until her knees were bent, so that her body made a Z shape. That would keep her from rolling onto her stomach. Sasuke sighed and let himself slip down the wall adjacent to her bed, making sure he was still in eyesight of her. Isn't this what you were supposed to do for someone who was intoxicated? Watch them to make sure they would be okay. Sure, he imagined he would eventually find himself in this situation one day, but he never imagined having to look after Sakura. Naruto, or Kakashi maybe, but not her. In fact, if that were the case, he would have probably ditched either of them onto Sakura for her to look after. In order for Sakura to have done something that was completely unlike her, she must really be suffering. But even in her suffering, Sakura had always dealt with it in strength, hadn't she? Why would she suddenly resort to alcohol? To be honest, Sasuke blamed Sannin Hokage-sensei for hers. With as much time as Sakura had spent with her, Tsunade was bound to have an influence. While they were mostly good influences, he didn't see why there wouldn't be some bad habits his Kunoichi teammate had picked up over time. Sasuke sighed, resolved to let the questions go. For now, all he cared about was that Sakura was alright. Kakashi had said she would be okay as far as alcohol poisoning was concerned. In the meantime, what she needed was rest and water. He had tried to give her the latter of the two earlier on the street, but she had resisted him. He had tried to talk to her, but she seemed too out of it to listen. In all honesty, Sasuke had been surprised that Sakura had been able to wake up at all. It seemed that even when she was drunk, she was nearly impervious to genjutsu. On anyone else, the genjutsu wouldn't have worn off for hours. He remembered using the Sharingan on Sakura before his battle with Naruto, when Sakura had once again pleaded with him. Of course, he had been more ruthless at the time, but his goal had been to immobilize her with his genjutsu in order to prevent her interference in their fight. After the battle, when Sasuke laid side by side with his blonde friend, arm missing at the elbow, Sakura had shown up and healed her teammates devotedly despite the genjutsu he had just placed her under. Sakura, he had begun, only for her to interrupt him. Just shut up for now. I'm concentrating. He continued despite her command, I'm sorry. She had played it off, saying, sorry. For what? Sasuke had stared up at her, genuinely regretful of his behavior towards her over the past 3 years. It was with this feeling that he had spoken, for everything up until now. For some reason, Sasuke found that his regrets still lingered. Maybe that was why he was keeping a careful eye on his drunk teammate while she slept, right now. Looking back, Sasuke realized he owed Sakura a lot. Whenever Sasuke had been sick, injured, or hospitalized, it was always Sakura who had attended him, sitting by his bedside and doing things like bringing him flowers and peeling him apples. A sharp image of shattering glass and falling apples came to his mind. He had smacked her offered plate away angrily and proceeded to challenge Naruto to a fight. Sasuke sighed again and buried his face into his palm. He truly felt guilty for not valuing his friends more. Even to this day, he was away from them. Sasuke couldn't help but recall what Sai had said to him in the hospital. If you want to know what I think it would be best for both Naruto and Sakura if you left and didn't come back. Sasuke knew that Sai was right. He didn't deserve the happiness the two of his friends held out towards him so freely. Sakura's pounding head woke her the following morning. She groaned, covering her face with a pillow to block out the light streaming through her bedroom window, and hugged it to her face tightly to relieve the throbbing. Finally, as her body refused to slip back into unconsciousness, memories from the following day began to return to her. She recalled Amiko's death and Sakura's sorrow returned to her, frustrated tears pricking the corner of her eyes. She had been so upset that Sakura began to question her decisions in opening her mental health clinic as she worked throughout the rest of the day after the child's death. Not only this, but a couple of her burn patients had come in with late negative reactions to her healing poultice. The skin looked as if it had started to heal, but had stopped and recoiled at the medicine, reddening and swelling. Of course, this had prolonged her patients' healing, and they had only come in when they couldn't bear the pain anymore. After softening the medicine and removing it, Sakura had used the last of her chakra to reverse the damage. Drained and frustrated with herself, Sakura had gone into her office at the end of the day and cried. She had remembered Tsunade telling her that she had to be tough in this profession. Sakura had asked Tsunade one time what she did when the pain was overwhelming, and Tsunade had jokingly admitted, "That's what sake is for." At the time, Sakura had shaken her head and laughed, dismissing the comment completely. But as she sat in her office, Sakura recalled the memory and so had determinedly located the stash she knew her sensei hid in her office. Taking them all back to her own office, Sakura had stared at the bottles for a few minutes before deciding to go through with it. It's not like anyone or anything else could help her anyway. Ino had told her it wasn't her fault, Shizune had said that there was nothing that could be done to stop someone bent on suicide, the rest of her coworkers promised to do more than what they already were, and Kirai had made her feel even more guilty for apologizing to her all day. She shouldn't have put so much responsibility on the girl's shoulders anyway. She didn't want to talk to anyone anymore. Naruto always had a way of making her feel better, but of course, he was gone. The only other person she cared to see was Sasuke, and even he wanted nothing to do with her. She had tried to be brave, offering him a key to her apartment she knew he didn't want. She had practically dragged him to her apartment so he could get out of the rain and have a decent meal. He didn't want her help. He didn't want her affection. He would rather be on his own. These were the thoughts that Sakura had as she opened the first bottle. She didn't make it very far into the first bottle before she began to feel funny. And as she began the second bottle, she heard voices outside her door. Kakashi had apparently shown up to console her, for he had asked, "Sakura, can I come in?" "Don't even think about it," she had said, crossing her arms over her chest. And every time he tried, she fired a bottle in his direction. Eventually someone made their way in, pinning her arms behind her. All she remembered was that as she faced the person, she saw red eyes before everything went black. Red eyes, Sakura thought, removing the pillow from her face, realization dawning on her. Sasuke. No, Sakura thought, Kakashi had Sharingan, too. Although she only ever saw Kakashi use Genjutsu against Zabuza, she knew he had the ability. But would he have used it on her? Not likely. Then, Sakura recalled waking up in the middle of being carried by someone. At the time, she had thought it was an enemy, but apparently it was a friend if she was currently laying in her bed. Maybe it was Kakashi after all. Sitting up in her bed was more painful than Sakura had expected. She deserved it, she supposed, for acting so foolishly yesterday. She knew what the consequences would be, but at the moment she hadn't cared. Grabbing her head, she slowly swung her legs over her bed before finding her balance to stand. Squinting in the morning light, Sakura stumbled until she could grab her doorknob to steady herself. Before opening the door, a couple of muffled voices met Sakura's ears and she immediately froze, ninja instincts returning to her. Voices. Who was in her house? Silently, Sakura placed her ear against the door. It was hard to hear anything clearly because of the constant sound of her heartbeat in her head and ears. She's sleeping, a low voice grumbled. Someone responded, but the voice was too distant to hear. A girl's voice. She just needs sleep, now go away. Her eyes widened as she matched the sarcasm to the tone of voice. Along with the pounding in her head, Sakura could feel another form of thrumming begin in her heart. Sasuke. Was it him who had brought her home? Oh no, she thought. If Sasuke were here, then he probably witnessed her drunk episode last night. That's just fantastic, she thought, seriously considering turning around and crawling back into bed due to her embarrassment. After a few seconds of working up her courage, Sakura carefully unlatched the door and peeked outside through the crack. The morning light was almost too much for her befuddled senses. She took a couple steps out into the hallway, looking towards the direction of her front door. Sasuke wasn't there. Maybe he left. Just as she was coming around the corner, Sakura stumbled and grabbed hold of the wall, leaning against it for support. Something caught hold of her arm and Sakura snapped her head towards the left, an action that had her reaching up to support her head. Looking down at her, a trace of concern in his usual blank expression, was Sasuke. You're awake, he stated rather than asked. Despite her pounding head, Sakura couldn't help but react happily to his voice. She tried to smile. She almost couldn't believe it. He was here. Sasuke, I didn't expect you to be here. Did you bring me? You should go lie back down, he ordered, interrupting her immediately. He tried to lift her off the wall by pulling carefully on her arm, but she waved him off. No, I just need some medicine from the cabinet. Don't bother, I'll get it, he said, holding on to her as she tried to make her way into the kitchen. He led her into the dining room instead, forcing her to sit in one of the chairs. Grabbing her head, Sakura relaxed into the chair, thankful to be sitting again. It's in the cabinet above the stove. Look for the container that has a yellow label. Would you mind bringing me some water, too, if you don't mind? She heard him rustle around in the cabinets for a minute, bottles clinking. Sakura groaned inwardly. She had forgotten how terribly messy that cabinet was. What is this? Sasuke asked, returning a moment later, sitting the glass jar down in front of her, along with a cup of water. Sasuke stood over her as she began to pour some of the jar's contents into the water. Just having him in the same room made her nerves do funny things, but now he was standing within a couple feet of her, which was really making her sweat. It also didn't help that she was mortified to have him see her in this pathetic post-drunk state. What had she done? If she was so bent on having Sasuke respect her and believe in her, why had she gone and done that? Finally, after taking a heavy gulp of the mixture, she replied, it's a mix of cysteine and potassium that breaks down the acetaldehyde in the liver. I developed it for Lee when he uses the drunken fist. Sasuke replied, taking the jar off the table and putting it back in its place in the cabinet. Relief permeated throughout Sakura's body as the medicine began to take effect. Slowly, Sakura summoned to her fingertips what little chakra she had managed to gather in this state overnight. Once her fingers began to glow, she placed them weakly on her temples. Immediately, the sensitivity in her eyes began to fade and her vision slowly cleared, returning to her at last. The sharp noises dulled and Sakura's pain began to ebb away. Looking behind her, Sakura was able to see Sasuke clearly for the first time. He was leaning against the wall behind her, eyes closed, arms crossed over his chest. The sun from the adjacent window was illuminating his features and casting a glint across the ninja headband he had hanging from his belt. Thank you for helping me, Sakura stated as she appraised him. Seeing him in her home like this, knowing that he had once again come to her aid, gave Sakura a little bit of hope. It's not like you ever help yourself, he stated matter-of-factly, annoyance apparent in his voice. Sakura blushed, embarrassed at his rude comment. She deserved it, she supposed, in this circumstance. However, the comment still stung. You didn't have to, she said, trying to offer him an apologetic smile. But I'm grateful regardless. Sasuke looked away from her, obviously out of patience. He didn't give her a reply. They sat in silence for a few minutes then, neither of them talking about what happened last night. Sasuke leaned against the wall, frowning. With everything else, Sakura was also feeling extreme guilt for getting him involved in this. Who was at the door? She asked, suddenly remembering his previous conversation with a person outside. Your bothersome blonde friend, and not the one I want to see. Sakura had two blonde friends, Naruto and Ino, who were both definitely bothersome, as Sasuke had put it. What did she want? She asked, turning her body more towards him. To bring you these, he said, pushing off the wall, grabbing a package off the kitchen counter and walking over to drop a wrapped bouquet of flowers onto the table in front of her. Oh, she exclaimed, taking the package gingerly in her hands. The flowers were a mix of vibrant red and blue, and Sakura recognized the type of flower immediately. In all her years spent with Ino, she was able to decipher the meaning behind the two types of poppies. The blue poppies represented get well and sympathy, where the red poppies were symbolic of loss and grief. Only Ino would use flowers to communicate her feelings about Amiko's death, and Sakura couldn't help but feel sad again, despite being touched at Ino's gift. Sakura stood then, unbundling the flowers while walking into the kitchen. She located an empty vase in the cabinet below her sink and proceeded to fill it with water. As she placed the flowers carefully in the vase, Sakura couldn't help but think that the red poppies looked so much like the Sharingan. Sneaking a brief glimpse at the man in her dining room, she noticed that he had shifted in her direction, watching her from his peripheral vision. Loss, death, red poppies, and the Sharingan. Sakura realized that she was struggling now with the death of someone she barely knew, but Sasuke had lost the people closest to him. And if she felt like a failure now, she couldn't imagine what Sasuke had experienced on that terrible night, long ago. Her feelings of anger, regret, and sorrow had caused her to react irrationally last night. She kind of understood a little better now, why Sasuke had left the village and chose the path that he did. As Sakura continued to unwrap the bundle, she discovered a single bright pink peony bloom hidden among the poppies. She knew exactly what this one meant: bravery and strength. Tears suddenly pricked Sakura's eyes as she recalled a conversation she had had with Ino. Sakura, even your name is a flower. You should have much more interest in Hanakotoba. Sakura had giggled at Ino's logic as she waited for her friend to finish closing down her flower shop, one summer evening. It just all seems a little too much, don't you think? Sakura had asked. And besides, the only flowers I've ever given to anyone were to people who didn't necessarily know what they meant. When she said this, Sakura thought of Sasuke, Naruto, and Lee. Looking back, she had been silly to think they could decipher the meaning. It's always a pleasant gesture to receive flowers, no matter if you understand what they mean or not, replied Ino, plucking a flower out of a basket she had near the front desk. It was light pink and the size of two fists held close together. For example, began Ino, placing the bloom in Sakura's hand. If I gave you this, you would be happy to receive it because it is beautiful. Sakura had nodded in agreement, fingering the lacy petals. Taking back the flower, Ino had reached up and pulled back Sakura's hair, arranging the flower so that it adorned the left side of her newly fixed bun. But in Hanakotoba, this flower means bravery and strength, Ino had said with a smile. So when you receive this flower, it means that the giver thinks highly of you. It means that they admire your bravery and believe in your strength. Sakura had reached up to touch the flower that matched her hair color, feeling extreme happiness at her friend's words. She had worn the flower for the rest of that night. Now, as Sakura clutched the bright pink blossom in her hand, tears began to stream down her cheeks. Despite her failure to save Amiko and despite her pathetic display of drunkenness, her dearest friend still believed that she was brave and that she was strong. Sakura turned so that her face was hidden from him. Sasuke couldn't help but stand up straight when he realized that Sakura was crying. For a second, he didn't know why she was, and he instantly regretted being so harsh to her a moment ago. Yes, he was beyond annoyed with the girl who had him running around worried yesterday, who had gotten herself drunk, and was now making him feel completely at a loss for what to do in this situation. He knew what the former Sasuke would have done. He would have left. He wouldn't have cared if he saw her crying. In fact, he would have thought her weak. Even back in the day, before he let darkness envelope him, Sasuke would have let Naruto deal with this. Naruto would know what to do. Naruto always knew what to say. And to his extreme exasperation, Naruto wasn't here. She was wiping at her face when Sasuke approached. He didn't touch her. He just stood behind her, listening to her sniffle. Sasuke knew what it was like to suffer by yourself. He knew that Sakura was in pain. Most of the pain she had experienced in her life was because of him, so he felt like he needed to make up for all of that now. Finally, after a few seconds, he forced himself to say, "I'm sorry about the girl." "Don't be," Sakura said, after a few seconds of silence. "It's my fault. I couldn't be there to save her." When he didn't say anything, Sakura continued to wipe her eyes and say, "I opened this medical clinic to save children who were suffering from mental trauma. I brought Amiko to Konoha because I thought I could save her. But I failed." What could he say? He wanted to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that nothing she did could have changed someone's mind once it was set. He knew that for sure. In fact, Sakura had tried to stop him before he had left, but was unable to. But Sasuke sure wasn't going to bring that up. That would only make her cry more. So he didn't say anything. Sasuke was starting to regret not letting Sakura's friend come inside. Ino would have done a way better job at consoling her than he was currently doing. Wiping her eyes, Sakura finally turned to face him. Her eyes were red and glassy from crying. Sasuke sure knew that look. He had seen it several times. "About last night," Sakura said, trying to smile. I'm sorry. About all of it. But can I ask you a question?" After Sasuke nodded, she asked, "Why did you show up to help me?" Sasuke knew he couldn't remain silent anymore despite how badly he didn't want to answer. Several answers ran through his head. "Because I was scared something bad had happened to you. Because I was worried sick when Kakashi left me that morning to find you. Because I haven't been here for you when you needed me. Because I'm sorry for everything I've done. Because I don't want to see you in pain anymore." But Sasuke couldn't say these things. If Sakura heard these words, he would only be causing her more pain in the long run. He wanted to be here for her now, but he knew that he couldn't be. He had to find and stop Kagaya. So instead, he pushed down these words and said, "Because Shikamaru came looking for me." Sakura looked down, and said, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed." "You should be," he chastised, allowing a small smirk to touch his mouth. "You threw up on me." Her face turned a bright red and Sasuke crossed his arms in victory. After a few smug seconds on his part, Sakura deflated his pride when she said, "Now we are even. For the genjutsu, I mean, since it's obvious who did it now." Sasuke's smirk vanished. Yeah, he supposed he deserved that. A knock came from the door and Sasuke instantly frowned, his mood darkening. Walking to the door, Sasuke swore that if it was that loud blonde again, he'd tell her she could take her flowers and get the hell. But it wasn't Ino at the door. It was Kakashi, garbed in white and red. He wore the hat of the Hokage and was accompanied by the woman Sasuke knew as Shizune. Giving Sasuke a knowing smile under his mask, Kakashi raised a hand in greeting. Didn't expect you to still be here. Care if we come in? Thanks for watching.